The new food pyramid differs from previous federal nutrition guidelines by inverting the traditional hierarchy of foods. Instead of emphasizing grains as the foundation, the new model prioritizes protein, full fat dairy, healthy fats, fruits, and vegetables while placing whole grains at the very bottom. It discourages refined carbohydrates, added sugars, and highly processed foods, but it almost doubles the recommended protein intake of previous pyramids. Speakers this week will analyze the new guidelines with a special focus on school lunch nutrition and traditional ethnic diets. They will also discuss ultra processed foods and HHS's stated goal of eliminating harmful additives, particularly in snacks. Speakers will also discuss the environmental impacts of consuming more red meat and factory farming. We invite reporters to post their questions in the chat, and we will take questions from reporters immediately after each speaker presents. We will also send a video and follow-up materials after today's briefing. We ask speakers to speak slowly for our simultaneous interpreters in Korean, Mandarin, and Spanish. Our panelists today are Dr. Marion Nessel, Professor of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health Emerita at New York University. Ms. Nessel also served as the Senior Nutrition Policy Advisor at HHS. Dr. Christopher Gardner, Professor of Medicine at Stanford University's School of Medicine, and Dr. Sailesh Rao, founder of Climate Healers. Welcome to all of our speakers. Thank you for joining us today. We begin first with Dr. Christopher Gardner, who will provide an overall analysis of the new pyramid. Dr. Gardner will also drill down on the impact to school nutrition programs. Welcome, Dr. Gardner.
Thank you so much for having me. Hope everybody can hear. Yeah, this has been an interesting topic ever since those new guidelines got released on January 8th. And can we start with the iconic pyramid that is part of the discussion today? So we had a pyramid when all this started back in 1990-ish. Nobody really liked the pyramid, to be perfectly honest. At one point, it was the pyramid. Then it was mypyramid.gov, and it was tailored for different individuals. And in 2011, Michelle Obama helped switch that iconic figure to a plate, which was a lot easier to understand. Half your plate should be veggies and fruits. You should have some whole grains on there and some different protein sources. So there was a lot of politics involved. I happened to be involved in this round's Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, which ever since Marion's days when she worked on this, has pretty much been instituted where a group of 20 scientists would be asked for 2 years prior to the update to review all new evidence and recommend in an advisory way, not a demanding way, an advisory way, to the Secretaries of Health and Human Services and Agriculture, how they might update the guidelines based on new evidence. And so participating in that for 2 years was a very rewarding experience, and we handed the advisory off to the secretaries at the time when the administration had just changed over from Biden to Trump. And so, somewhat to our surprise, we handed this off to RFK Jr., who pretty much very vocally on social media dismissed our report, said it was too complicated, it was too long, and they would come up with a new approach for this. And we waited for a year to come out, a little more than a year. And when it came out, here was this upside down pyramid. Thought, who brought the pyramid back? We got rid of this a long time ago. And why is it upside down? And I just want to give a quick take on why I think it's upside down. So if you actually look at all the different 10 or so different domains of recommendations, most of them are consistent with old recommendations. So there's really a lot of sound advice in the new dietary guidelines. But I have heard from the current administration that they feel this is a dramatic shift. Nothing like this has happened in the last 40 years. This is staggering how they're going to clean up the American food system. And Mary and I had the privilege of being on sort of a preview call for this. And we thought, well, yeah, most of that is pretty sound. And I think they were a little upset hearing that advice, thinking, no, 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 this is a huge turnaround. And so I actually take the flipping of the pyramid as being a sensationalist approach to say this is so radical that we have flipped the whole pyramid upside down. To be honest, the pyramid itself is a little hard to interpret. The veggies and fruits are scattered up and down. Sunita, you had mentioned that they are still promoting whole grains. And in fact, they say 2 to 4 servings of whole grains a day, but they've moved it to the bottom of the upside down flipped pyramid. And it looks like that is the thing you should have the least of. But if you should have 2 to 4 grams of whole grains, that part's confusing. A lot of different people have tried to put things together about 10% saturated fat as a limit with beef tallow and butter and red meat and 3 servings of whole fat dairy a day. So I think if you read the whole text, it's clearer than looking at the pyramid itself. So let me just drill down on just 2 things. So one of the main points that our Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee came up with was we suggested across multiple domains that we have looked at, a consistent message that we're seeing is more legumes, which are beans, peas, and lentils. Americans don't usually use the word legumes, so we often said beans, peas, and lentils, and less red and processed meat. That was one of our main conclusions to the secretaries. And so it was a bit of a slap in the face to see that the pyramid had a big stake in the upper left-hand corner of the pyramid, and RFK Jr. came out on social media immediately afterwards saying beef is back, butter is back, meat is back. That was very hard to hear given the recommendations that we had just made. And prioritizing protein at every meal and taking what has been an established number for many decades about how much protein to get relative to your weight and practically doubling that. Protein has never been a nutrient of concern in these dietary guidelines. And given how much protein is being promoted in the grocery stores these days, protein Pop-Tarts, protein water, protein everything, I feel like Americans are going to think, wow, maybe all that is justified. And maybe the reason all those products have protein is because we were only recommending half as much as was needed before. And that's really not true at all. So that has bothered a lot of health professionals. So in the new guidelines, they do say lentils, peas, beans, things like that, but they also say red meat and all the other things. So I'm a little worried that Americans are going to think, yes, I should have the protein Pop-Tarts and I should have the protein water and I should have meat because that's how Americans think of protein. Now, let me just take the last minute of my time and switch over to schools, and then I'm happy to take some questions. So I think Marion is going to address the ultra-processed food and the sugar, which is really great. A lot of us are applauding how strongly they're coming down on added sugar and ultra-processed food. School lunch has too many of those. School lunch is an important issue because as much as many Americans don't even follow the dietary guidelines for Americans, one of the places where they have the biggest impact is when it's a safety net system in the federal government and they're required to follow the dietary guidelines. So how are schools going to implement this? So I love the idea of getting out ultra-processed food and sugar. I'm concerned about prioritizing protein in the meals of our school lunches. And I'm really not seeing a lot of direction and support of taking those foods out, incentivizing the food industry to provide the healthier foods and allowing school lunch more funding. They've always been handcuffed by not having enough funding to provide healthy foods for school. In fact, I think it was just months ago that they took $1 billion away of funds that were related to COVID, that were related to programs, putting a little more money into local produce, et cetera. So instead of adding money, they've recently taken away money. So I think for the rest of the conversation, we'll hear a lot from our other 2 speakers about how would you implement these new guidelines with 3 servings of whole fat dairy a day, prioritizing protein, saying whole fat or whole grains are good, but moving them to the bottom of the food pyramid, how is a school lunch food service director going to take that advice and use the funding that they have to improve the school lunch quality of our kids? So finish off. There's a lot of really good advice in there, but it's not very radical. And some of the issues like protein and whole grains and 3 servings of whole fat dairy a day when a majority of the world's population is lactose intolerant is really insensitive. So let me see if I could take any questions after having shared that.
Well, there are a lot of questions for you, but I'm going to start with one. Dr. Gardner, numerous studies suggest a link between meat and full-fat dairy consumption and greater risk for heart disease, diabetes, and other chronic illnesses. Should we expect to see a greater epidemic of cardiovascular disease in the coming years as more Americans follow this basic food pyramid?
Well, Americans don't really follow the food pyramid, and they
Okay.
already eat too much meat. But if they were to follow these, yes. So I do a lot of work with the American Heart Association. These guidelines are not consistent with American Heart. They say for your protein, get most of it from legumes and nuts and beans, and they do not recommend whole fat dairy. I would say the dairy part of whole fat is a different issue that we do not have time for today, as opposed to the saturated fat from lard and meat and bacon and other things. I'm not really all that upset about whole fat milk in schools, especially if it was compared to chocolate milk. Chocolate low fat milk, which wouldn't have the saturated fat, but would have the sugar, right? And so yeah, I mean, the new guidelines are not consistent with American Heart.
Absolutely. Low-fat chocolate milk was what we got as kids in school lunches in the 70s. So thinking about that, we have a lot of questions for you. Let's get to some of these. Henrietta Burrows, would you please start with your question?
Thanks so much, Sunita. Dr. Gardner, do you think the prioritizing of beef and butter in the new guidelines came from the influence of the beef and dairy industries?
Thank you for that question. So, the politics of this are always pretty obvious, right? I mean, we have really powerful lobbyists in dairy and beef. I don't really think there's a leguminati lobbying component here where Big Bean is in there lobbying for more beans, which we should have more of. I guess what was really hurtful as being part of the committee that I was on is we were slandered for having too many conflicts with food industry. So in every single dietary guidelines update that's been released forever, when they get senior nutrition folks, many of them at some point or another have had some connection with the food industry. But the hypocrisy was just horrific when we were slandered for all of our connections, and they chose a new committee of 9 people who, when they disclosed their ties, actually half of them had closer ties to dairy and beef than the original committee that was looking at this. I don't think there is any way to avoid politics here. One of the groups getting these guidelines out is the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture represents all ag. That means it represents beef and dairy and pork and chicken, and at some level, vegetables and fruits and beans, peas, and lentils. But the powerful lobbyists are more the meat and the dairy and the egg industry that are high in protein. So there is certainly politics involved. I don't think that will ever change. So we just have to have transparency about it and do what we can to address it. It's beyond my capacity at this point, interested in other people's perspectives.
Thank you. Irene Diaz-Bazan has the next question. Irene, welcome. Please ask your question.
Yes, thank you. What guidance do authorities give to parents regarding school meals? Would be advisable to send meals from home? For minority families with limited financial resources, how can they meet the new nutrition guidelines without facing economic challenges? Thank you.
Oh, It's such a good question. You know, wouldn't it be wonderful if parents had the time and the resources to make lunch and it didn't have to come from schools? Really, part of the issue that school lunch is there is because so many parents don't have the resources and don't have the time. So many of our kids get a huge proportion of their calories from not only school lunch, but school breakfast. I will add the perspective that there are parents who make horribly unhealthy lunches to send to school with their kids. I've seen places where they, back in the days of Michelle Obama's Healthy Hunger Free Kid Act, when they were making the school meals healthier, parents were showing up at the gates of the school and handing candy bars through the bars to their kids who were complaining that the foods were too healthy. So bringing parents into this is an important part. And I think the parent angle of this is almost just as challenging. So do they have the time and do they have the resources? That is a challenge. Were they raised in such a way that they're prepared to give their kids a healthy lunch? Some of them just go for the simple, convenient thing that comes out of the store that isn't all that healthy also. So I think it's a more challenging issue that just, will the parents be able to replace this? That's a topic for a longer conversation, but thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Araceli Martinez from La Opinion has the next question. Araceli, in the interest of time, will you please ask the second portion of your question?
Yes, and I think that already the other part was answered. So, and looking at these recommendations and considering how much meat prices have increased, to what extent will we be able to follow this pyramid?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. There's a meat-based. Sunita, can you rephrase that?
Yeah. Yes. So considering how much meat prices have risen, to what extent will we be able to adhere to this pyramid?
Oh, well, I would actually be happy if meat prices increased. I actually think that, so the meat prices really are artificially low, to be perfectly honest. There's different levels of support that allow meat to be low. And part of that is our concentrated animal feeding operations that our other speaker today will address. I actually really think meat prices should be higher to reflect the true cost of food. And that if we had better quality meat and less meat, that would be well in line with what most health professionals have recommended for a long time. I work a lot with the Culinary Institute of America with chefs that are making food taste great, and they're pushing for a protein flip, which is celebrating beans, peas, and lentils and vegetables at the center of the plate and having smaller portions of meat, not 6 ounces, but 2 ounces. So if the cost went up, but it was a smaller portion or a condiment or a side dish, that would actually, I think, be consistent with good health promotion, but not so much with this new food pyramid guideline that came out. And I think that's going to have to be the end of my contribution today because we have 2 other fabulous speakers. So I think I'm going to back off for now, right?
Yes, but before you drop off, Dr. Gardner, could you give us your 30-second soundbite? What most important piece of your conversation would you like reporters to take away?
Oh, I really like the push for eat real food. This has been fantastic. That's a big push. And they say a bigger push on getting rid of sugar and ultra-processed foods. That's fantastic. I love that. But I would love to see them put some more emphasis in terms of how would you follow up on that? Are you going to have regulatory maneuvers to get the food industry to stop producing all that? If it's voluntary, like it has been for colors and other things, what we've already seen is no, M&Ms have not stopped coloring their candies. No, Skittles have not stopped coloring their candies. If these are voluntary, it's going to be quite challenging. So I have seen some strong language with what we need to push forward, but if it's voluntary, it won't really happen.
Dr. Gardner, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Our next speaker is Dr. Marion Nessel, author of many books, including What to Eat Now, and the blog Food Politics. I'm going to ask Dr. Nessel a few questions, and then we will move on to questions from reporters. So please enter your questions in the chat. Dr. Nessel, let's begin with this question. The guidelines tell Americans to reduce ultra-processed foods, but most of the US food supply is, in fact, heavily processed. Do you think this advice places too much responsibility on individuals rather than addressing the structure of the food system? And to follow up, how does HHS need to define more clearly what highly processed foods are?
Yeah, first of all, I'm really happy to be here and to follow Christopher Gardner, whose work I admire a great deal. I want to make a couple of comments on what he said, and this leads right into your question. I was on the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee in 1995, and that was a time at which the Scientific Advisory Committee chose the research questions, did the research, wrote the research report, and wrote the dietary guidelines. It was a scientific process. Today, the Scientific Advisory Committee writes the advisory committee's report. It's advisory. The agencies take it over completely from there. And one of the issues that's very clearly stated in the new dietary guidelines and new pyramid is that the function of these documents is to educate the public so that the public can exercise its personal responsibility. And in fact, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Made a statement just last week saying, we are not going to do any legislation or regulation about this. That would be nanny state. We are educating the public about personal responsibility. And if the focus is on personal responsibility, then the government's role is in fact education. If you really want, and the food industry loves that, because the food industry knows perfectly well that education is not enough to change dietary behavior. If education was enough, then 40 years of pyramids and plates and whatever would have done the job, and they haven't. And I, by the way, was a big fan of the first pyramid. The first pyramid, which had meat and dairy at the top and grains and fruits and vegetables at the bottom, was the product of 12 years of research, two kinds of research. Would the specifics of portion size and number of servings meet nutritional requirements? And did the public understand that what was at the top of the pyramid was what they were supposed to eat less of? And the pyramid won over many, many, many other designs. People did not like the upside down pyramid because they felt it was unbalanced, and they did not like plates because they couldn't understand them. In fact, plates are much harder to understand than the pyramid. So the pyramid is a good design. It doesn't work upside down. And the one that we have now that was introduced in January is very meat-centric, as Dr. Gardner said. It's a eat more meat pyramid, and it's a eat whole fat dairy pyramid. And meat is because protein is understood by the public as a euphemism for meat, and whole fat dairy is understood by the public as a euphemism for raw milk. So this pyramid in dietary guidelines, without saying so explicitly, are about eating real food. Fine, love that message, but it's also about eating more meat and high-fat dairy products and whole milk and raw milk as far as that goes. And there are many examples of the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Secretary of Agriculture drinking raw milk posed with milk mustaches. And in fact, the President of the United States posed with a milk mustache ad. So the personal responsibility message is one that gets the government off the hook. The government doesn't have to do anything about taxes, about labeling, about restrictions on marketing, about restrictions on the content of foods. It can just say it's up to you. We think you should eat less sugar, and it's up to you to make that happen. And we hope that the food companies will go along with it. I don't think that's going to work.
Right. You've expressed concern that people on SNAP benefits and WIC, the Women's Nutrition Program, may not have access to whole foods because of cost. But isn't it cheaper to eat a plant-focused diet rather than one that emphasizes meat and dairy? Say, for example, the cost of a can of chickpeas and a bunch of kale versus the cost of a pound of chicken or beef.
Well, I think there are two issues: cost, time, and palatability. It's perfectly possible to eat absolutely delicious plant-based foods if you know how to cook. If you have the equipment, if you have pots, pans, and knives, if you have a refrigerator, if you have a stove, and there are very, very large swaths of the American population that do not, in fact, have these things. And if you are a low-income worker working 3 jobs to try to earn enough money to feed your family, the last thing in the world you want to have to do is to go food shopping when there may not be a grocery store anywhere near where you live. You may not have transportation. You may not have time to cook, and you may not have the equipment for cooking. So the food industry has moved into that gap by producing very cheap products, ultra processed. And I'll do a quick explanation of what that means. It means industrially produced, doesn't look anything like the food that it was derived from. You can't make it in your home kitchen because you don't have the equipment or the industrial additives. And the products were designed to be profitable because they can last long on a shelf, and also designed to be irresistible, if not addictive. The whole purpose of ultra processed foods is to have products that you can't stop eating, because the food industry is not a social science agency and it's not a public health agency. The food industry is a business. Its job is to make money. That's what they're about, and produce profits for shareholders. And ultra processed foods are extraordinarily profitable. So that's what we're dealing with. If you as an individual are going to a grocery store to try to eat healthfully, you are fighting the entire food system on your own.
Absolutely. So my colleague Peter Sherman from ACoM has a related question. Peter, could you please ask your question?
Hi, thank you, Sunita. Well, I have a number of questions, but I'll try to limit it to one. I was actually just typing in the chat. You know, it, people have known about the negative health effects of fast foods for years and years and years. Super Size Me, the documentary that came out many years ago that really showed, I think, in really stark terms what eating this food does to you. And yet people will defend their right to eat this food. There are people that see these foods as inherent parts of their culture and their traditions. And I guess I'm wondering what is your sense about the most effective way to get this message across around the need to rebuild our relationship with real food? Clearly, what RFK is doing is trying to get at that, although the way you're describing it, it's remarkable to hear that this is really about just pawning it off on individual responsibility, which we hear was a strategy of the climate of oil companies as well, to push it on people and away from corporations. So I'm curious what you think is the most effective way to sort of to sort of inform people, even people who maybe aren't able to afford the time to go shopping, to cook, things like that. And a related question, I'll keep it very short. I was in Honduras a few years ago. I was driving through San Pedro Sula, and the skyline was dotted with fast food restaurants. And it just struck me that if archaeologists were to come 1,000 years from now, these would be the ruins of empire. This is what they would find next to the Mayan temples. They would find the golden arches and the KFCs. And diabetes is surging in Honduras. I'm wondering what you see in terms of these food industries pushing their products abroad as Americans perhaps start to turn away from them the way they did with tobacco? Thank you.
Well, those are related questions. I'm a public health person. And a public health approach to the problem of poor diets is to go what in public health terms is called upstream. That is, you look for the basic causes of why people eat the way they do. And the people in the United States who eat the healthiest diets are people with money and people with education. And so if you want to change the population's diet, you provide people with enough money to buy healthier foods and with the education to go with it. And then you develop a food system that promotes healthier eating. You don't leave it to individuals to have to fight the entire food system on their own. But this is an exact opposition to what food companies want. Let me just say that eating less is very, very bad for business. And if you want people to eat less and eat less of the wrong kinds of foods or eat less of ultra-processed foods, you are making making efforts that are going to hurt businesses. Businesses don't like that. They're going to lobby. One of the questions that was asked was whether the new pyramid was about meat and dairy industry lobbying or whether it was something else. I did a blog post, and I write a blog at foodpolitics.com, and I wrote that I thought the meat and dairy industries had a great deal to do with the content of these particular guidelines and pyramid. And people wrote in and said, no, this is ideology. This is the ideology of the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the ideology of the Trump administration. But I think it's a mixture of both. So if your ideology is that you don't do anything to hurt industry, and we saw this recently over the issue of glyphosate, which Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said it causes cancer just a few months ago. It causes cancer. And now he's saying, oh, but if we take glyphosate out of the food supply, it will hurt corn and soybean producers. So the politics of this is deeply entrenched. We're dealing with capitalism, with late stage capitalism here, in every way in which it works. And if you try to change people's diets by educating them that they should eat better, that's not going to work. You got to change the system. And how do you change the system? Well, I think I've got a long list, starting with universal basic income, universal school meals, an agriculture system refocused on food for people rather than feed for animals and fuel for automobiles. I could go on and on. I guess the biggest one is let's overturn the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United and get money out of politics. That would help.
Yep, absolutely. Nicole Chang has the first question for you. Nicole, please ask your question.
Yes, thank you so much, Sunita. There is a lot of good information available, but only is it provided by English or Spanish. But if there are not enough resources provided in other languages, because of the budget being reduced, so language accessible is very essential for the minority community. So I would like to know if there's any plan or measures to address or supplement this.
Good question.
Plan to
expand language access, or providing or reaching out.
I have
to
no idea.
communities.
I'm not responsible for the dietary guidelines or the pyramid. I have no idea what they're going to do with it.
Well, Dr. Nessel, opine on that a bit. Do you think that language access is necessary?
Of course it is.
Okay, yes.
I'm happy to say that the first edition of my book, What to Eat, has been translated into Korean. Those of you who are from Korea should look for it. I have a copy of it right here. Very happy to know that. I think everything should be translated into languages. I think one of the great sadnesses of my life was that I was not forced to learn languages when I was young and could do it. And I think Americans are very handicapped by not speaking a variety of languages. I wish we all did. And there certainly are plenty of people in the United States who don't speak English. So yes, I think it's enormously important. And I'm very proud that I have various of my books have been translated to Chinese and Japanese and Korean and Hebrew and Portuguese, but not Spanish, unfortunately.
Interesting. Tariq Khan has the next question. Tariq, please ask your question.
I don't know if it's a relevant question with the speaker, Leslie, but I was just asking, since we are talking about protein and make protein, I mean, what are the best proteins we can offer to the general public, which is affordable? And so, because protein is protein needs to be added in everybody's life nowadays, because protein is extremely important.
Can I answer that? I agree.
Yes.
I agree completely with Dr. Gardner. Protein is absolutely not a problem for anyone who eats enough calories and gets a variety of food. So in the United States, protein is a non-issue. In other countries where food is much scarcer, it could be a problem, but the plant-based proteins are healthier. And it's been known for decades and decades that if you eat a variety of plant sources of protein, you're getting the amino acids that you need and don't need to worry about it. And they don't have to be eaten at the same meal. They can be eaten at different meals. The major issue in nutrition always is a variety of relatively unprocessed foods, and that takes care of a lot of nutritional problems. So I'm not aware that protein needs to be added to anything. And I think the fact that protein is being added to everything is a matter of marketing. It has nothing to do with science.
Interesting. We have a few more questions for you. Nandita Bose, will you ask your question?
Yes, Sunita? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask Dr. Nessel about the emphasis on protein. Could it lead to an increase in the use of protein supplements? Already there is a trend, and I mean, a scenario where parents could just start adding protein supplements and powders to the diet of their children on a regular basis. What could be the repercussions of the excessive use of supplements?
Well, the one thing in favor of addition of protein, and this is already happening. I mean, protein is being added to everything in the supermarket. Some of the products are really funny. Protein is being put into beer. Protein is being put into candy. My favorite protein product is cookies and cream protein Cheerios. That's my favorite these days. The one thing about it is it's metabolized. It's very unlikely to be harmful. It's wasteful, but it's unlikely to be harmful. I haven't seen much convincing evidence of harm, except for the protein powders that have heavy metals in them. And when the protein powders are examined, they're found to have arsenic and too much of toxic metals in them. So I'm not in favor of protein supplements. I think they're a very bad idea. But if people are using them, they're mostly unlikely to be harmful.
Interesting. Dr. Nessel, stick around, please, for a final round of questions.
Sure.
All right, thank you so much. Our final speaker today is Dr. Sailesh Rao, the founder of Climate Healers. Dr. Rao will discuss the environmental impacts of greater meat and dairy consumption by Americans and factory farming. Welcome, Dr. Rao.
Thank you, Sunita. I prepared some remarks. I'm going to read that to you.
Yes.
So I'm going to speak about how the 2025 Dietary Guidelines for Americans impacts us from an environmental perspective. But more than that, I want to talk to you about what these guidelines reveal about the choices facing humanity right now. A choice between what we call Planet A and Planet B. Most people think the dietary guidelines are about health. They're jointly issued by the USDA and the Department of Health and Human Services. So surely health is the priority, right? Americans are critically deficient in fiber, an essential macronutrient. The USDA has admitted that 95% of Americans don't get enough fiber. So you would think that the guidelines would address this glaring deficiency, right? You'd be wrong on both counts. What I want to show you is that these guidelines exemplify a system called Planet A, our current operating system that's driving what I call the polycrisis, which is 26 tightly interwoven existential threats, including planetary overheating, mass extinction, chronic disease epidemics, freshwater depletion, world hunger, and rising inequality. These are not separate problems. They are one interconnected emergency, and the dietary guidelines actively make it worse. Here is the problem. While HHS may co-issue these guidelines, the process is dominated by commercial interests. Advisory committee members have documented ties to meat, dairy, and pharmaceutical industries. Research considered is industry funded. And critically, environmental impact, the single most important factor determining whether our children inherit a habitable planet, is deliberately excluded from consideration. Now, when 330 million Americans follow these guidelines, the environmental consequences would be huge. The 2025 pyramid recommends dairy every single day. Producing 1 gallon of milk requires 1,000 gallons of water. Think about that while the Colorado River fails to reach the ocean and the Ogallala aquifer depletes. But water is just the tip of the iceberg. Dairy production uses vast land growing alfalfa and corn to feed cows, who convert 10 calories of plant food into 1 calorie of milk. This is catastrophic inefficiency, treated as normal. Planet A in action. That land use drives deforestation globally. Forests that took thousands of years to develop, storing carbon, filtering water, housing countless species, are cleared to grow feed for animals Americans are told they need to eat daily. The guidelines recommend meat without honestly comparing it to plant foods. Environmentally, there is no comparison. Beef generates 60 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions per pound. Lentils, less than 1 pound. That's not incremental difference. That's the gap between planet A and planet B. Chicken, promoted as better, still requires 10 times more land than plants for the same calories. Poultry operations pollute waterways, creating dead zones in rivers and coastal areas. Here's what the guidelines won't tell you. We don't need any animal products for health. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics states clearly that well-planned vegan diets are healthy for all life stages, including pregnancy, infancy, childhood, and athletic performance. The Eat Lancet Commission, the most comprehensive scientific review of diet and sustainability ever conducted, concluded that planetary health diet is primarily plant-based, with minimal or zero animal products. So why do the 2025 guidelines push animal products while excluding environmental science? Follow the money. This is Planet A with systems designed to maximize extraction and profit, regardless of consequences. But there is a planet B, the alternative operating system framework we are building, using systems aligned with ecological reality, designed for regeneration rather than extraction. If Americans followed plant-based dietary guidelines, like the one proposed by the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine and Dr. Michael Greger's Daily Dozen, we'd free up 300 million acres of agricultural land in the US alone, larger than California and Texas combined. That land could be rewilded, returning to forest, prairie, wetland. Those ecosystems would sequester carbon, rebuild soil, restore water cycles, and provide habitat for wildlife being driven to extinction. Agriculture would become planet healing, not planet destroying. We'd reduce water consumption by 70%. We'd eliminate agricultural antibiotic use, the leading cause of antibiotic resistance. We'd prevent millions of chronic disease deaths in coming decades. We'd eliminate Americans' single largest nutritional deficiency, lack of fiber. This is Planet B. The solution is simple. Beans, lentils, whole grains, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds. These foods are cheaper, healthier, and cause a fraction of the environmental impact. They are in grocery stores. They are part of cuisines from every culture. We don't need new technology or billion-dollar investments. We need honest guidelines telling Americans the truth. You don't need dairy for calcium. You don't need meat for protein. You don't need fish for omega-3s. You can get all of these nutrients from plants while shrinking your environmental footprint enormously. But Planet A won't surrender easily. The 2025 guidelines aren't honest nutrition advice. They're designed to maintain markets for products we don't need, that harm our health and destroy our only planet. This is the choice we face. Planet A driving the poly crisis towards planetary destruction, or Planet B, a framework for the poly solution that allows life to thrive. The dietary guidelines are a microcosm of this choice. They could guide Americans towards health and planetary healing. Instead, they guide us deeper into crisis. We are at a decision point. What we do now determines whether our children inherit a habitable world or a runaway ecological catastrophe. Every meal is a choice between Planet A and Planet B. Every policy is that choice. Every investment, every vote, every action. This poly crisis is an emergency. But the poly solution exists. Planet B is a practical framework grounded in science, with every element proven feasible. We can do better. We must do better. Our future, our children's future, and all life on Earth depends upon it. The question is, will we choose transformation while there is still time? Thank you.
Dr. Rao, thank you for your excellent remarks. I want to take I want to ask the first question. Do we face some of the same ethical conundrums with plant-based products? How much water, for example, would we need for a gallon of almond milk versus a pound of beef?
Right. I mean, a gallon of almond milk, almonds require water if you grow them as monocultures.
Right.
But if you grow almond trees as part of an agroforestry, almond trees turn out to be one of the best ways of filtering water, basically taking water from underground and transpiring it through the leaves. So we would be thanking the almond tree for doing that and creating clouds above the forest. Instead, when we grow them as monocultures, of course, you're going to have to pour a lot of water to make them grow. And that's why the almond milk footprint looks like it has a big water footprint. But even that is not as much as dairy milk.
Interesting. So you're a vegan. I've read some of your terrific recipes on your blog. Could you give us an example of your typical day's menu and inspire us to eat like you do, and tell us what are your cheats as well?
Yeah. So I try to follow Dr. Michael Greger's Daily Dozen. And it's not that you have to follow it every day, but over time, if you average out to, the servings of grains, servings of nuts and seeds and berries and mushrooms that he recommends, and greens, of course, you'll work out, it'll work out great. Your health will be amazing. You won't put on extra weight, and you will have a great life. That's what I do.
And your cheats?
My cheats, I do take a supplement from the Vegan Society called
Okay.
Veg One, and that has vitamin D and vitamin B12. So that's what I take every day as a supplement.
All right. Rebecca Bartis has the first question for you. Rebecca, please ask your question.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering, do you think meaningful climate actions require changing the US food system? And if so, what are proper measures?
Yeah, the meaningful climate action absolutely requires changing the food system worldwide, not just in the US. Because it turns out that when we burn fossil fuels, not only are we emitting warming gases like carbon dioxide and methane, we also emit cooling gases like sulfur dioxide. And those cooling gases only stay in the atmosphere for a few weeks. And they're actually masking most of the warming that fossil fuels have done so far, which means that the warming that we are experiencing today is mainly caused by animal agriculture, not caused by fossil fuels at the moment. So the right way to address climate action is to change the food system as quickly as possible and restore the forests. And as we restore the forests, we can dial down the fossil fuel use. So I see this as, you have to press the clutch first and then change the gear in the car. You cannot do it the other way around. So I encourage people to change the fossil fuel infrastructure over to clean energy sources, but for heaven's sake, go vegan first.
That's it. Henrietta Burrows has a question for you. Henrietta, please ask your question.
Thanks, Sunita. Dr. Rao, I'm sure you don't eat eggs. However, eggs are considered the perfect food. So should we completely abandon them from our diets?
Well, who said it's the perfect food? It's probably the egg industry.
The egg industry.
Correct. Yeah. The USDA has actually rated eggs as the number 2 source of dioxin in American diets, second only to fish. And dioxins are some of the strongest carcinogens known to man. And we emit a lot of dioxin in our industrial processes. So I don't think they're the perfect food. Okay. And
would flaxseed be a substitute for eggs?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So flax seeds and chia seeds, and these are substitutes for eggs in terms of baking. And even applesauce will do the job for you for baking.
Nafiso Ahmed has a question. Nafiso, please ask your question. I can ask it for him if he's unable to mute. How can schools promote diets that are both healthy and environmentally friendly? And I wanted to ask you, Dr. Rao, in India, school nutrition, school lunches look like lentils with rice, some vegetables, and maybe a sweet dish. Is that a model that's replicable in the United States?
Yeah, I absolutely love the midday meals that they serve in schools in India. Basically they serve a form of what we call khichdi. It's a mix of lentils and rice and vegetables and spices. And the children love it because they keep coming back for seconds. So it proves that when you offer tasty food, the kids will eat it. They'll come back for more. Yeah. Now, is that replicable in the US? And you can do a culturally appropriate version of the same thing. I call it Unities 2 or something like that. But we cannot actually offer gourmet vegan meals, and it won't be that expensive when we do it in bulk, right? With nicely presented and having all of the ingredients that they need for a healthy diet. I really think that nutrition, the purpose of the food system, should be to nourish people. Today, the purpose of the food system is not to nourish people, it's to make money for someone. And that's the problem we are facing.
Peter Sherman has a question for you. Peter?
Thank you, Sunita. I'd actually like to switch my question, if that's okay, and just to say, listening to you, Mr. Rao, I feel inclined now to return to my vegan days of many years ago. So thank you for such an eloquent and compelling presentation. I worked for a sustainable development company for several years, working in countries like Brazil, Peru, Colombia. One of the takeaways from that was that in the Amazon, where deforestation driven by beef production is really rampant, poverty was the crux of the issue. It was much easier for a poor person living in the Amazon to buy a cow and clear some land. The trees were valueless. So a lot of our work was focused on bringing value to trees through things like, I hate to say it, like carbon offsets and that sort of thing. So I'm just curious. I mean, your presentation is compelling and powerful. I don't know how applicable it can be in regions where poverty is rampant and where sometimes the only option is to invest in cattle.
No, I hear you. I call this a systems transformation that needs to happen. Because we have built all of our systems around profit making and extraction. And so long as that's how we are designing all our systems, you're going to get the results that you're getting. And this is why we have to look at this as a systems transformation. Because a system is based on what is its objective function? What is it designed to do? And so we have to create food systems that's about nourishing people. You have to create energy systems that's about providing energy to people. So a transportation system that's objective function is to transport people. So profit should not be the main motive. A little bit of profit is necessary to make it sustainable, but other than that, it should not be the main motive. And we have to have true cost accounting for everything that we do. And this is when you will be in alignment with reality. So I'm calling for a complete system transformation. And it's no one's fault that the things are the way they are today. They are the way they are because they evolved into this predicament that we are in. But once you realize that we are in this predicament, we have to look at it how do you solve the problem from an honest engineering perspective and deal with it properly.
Dr. Nessel and Dr. Rao, you've given us so much incredible information. I'd like to ask each of you for your 30-second soundbite. What are the most important takeaways you would like to leave reporters with? Let's start with you, Dr. Nessel. Oh, Dr. Nessel had to leave. So, Dr. Rao, leave us with your most important soundbite.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful to you for giving me this forum to speak to all of you. And so we know that we have a big fight ahead of us in terms of how do we get this into the minds of people? How do we get people to understand that we have to have a system transformation? And just like what is happening, in the real world, this is a David versus Goliath type of battle. But fortunately, through community media, we can get the word out to the grassroots. This is why I find what you're doing to be extremely inspiring. And thank you so much.
Thank you.